Operation Medak Pocket was a military operation undertaken by the Croatian Army between 9 to 17 September 1993, in which a salient reaching the south suburbs of Gospić, in the south-central Lika region of Croatia, then under the control of the self-proclaimed Republic of Serbian Krajina, was attacked by Croatian forces. The pocket was named after the village of Medak. The Croatian offensive temporarily succeeded in expelling rebel Serb forces from the pocket after several days of fighting. However, the operation ended in controversy after a skirmish with United Nations peacekeepers and accusations of serious Croatian war crimes against local Serb civilians. Although the outcome of the battle was a tactical victory for the Croatians, it became a serious political liability for the Croatian government, and international political pressure forced a withdrawal to the previous ceasefire lines. According to some Canadian sources, UNPROFOR personnel and Croatian troops exchanged heavy fire. In Canada, at the time, the battle was considered to be one of the most severe battles fought by the Canadian forces since the Korean War. Background: much of the interior of the Lika region of southern Croatia was captured by the forces of the self-proclaimed Republic of Serbian Krajina and the Serb-dominated Yugoslav People's Army during 1991. In Lika, almost all of the Croatian population in the Serb-held area was killed, expelled or forced to seek refuge in government-held areas, while the Serbs continued shelling of the Croatian city of Gospić throughout the year from the positions, killing hundreds of civilians. A ceasefire was agreed in the January 1992 Sarajevo Agreement, and a United Nations peacekeeping force UNPROFOR was installed to police the armistice lines, act as negotiators, aid workers and combat soldiers. Despite this, sporadic sniping and shelling continued to take place between the two sides. Gospić, which was close to the front lines, was repeatedly subjected to shell fire from the Serbian army of Krajina. The town was of great importance in securing lines of communication between Dalmatia and the rest of Croatia. Much of the shelling took place from the Serb-controlled Medak Pocket, an area of high ground near Medak, Croatia, approximately 4 to 5 kilometers wide and 5 to 6 kilometers long, which consisted of the localities of Devoselo, Sitlak and part of Positlj plus numerous small hamlets. The pocket was primarily a rural area with a combination of forest and open fields. It was fairly lightly inhabited before the attack, with about 400 Serb civilians residing in the area, and was held by units of the SVK's 15th Lika Corps. The pocket adjoined Sector South, one of the 4 United Nations protected areas in Croatia. It was not actually in the UNPA but lay just outside in a called Pink Zone, RSK-held territory outside the UNPAs, patrolled by UNPROFOR peacekeepers. Prior to the Medak Pocket offensive, Croatian government forces had launched several relatively small-scale attacks to retake rebel Serb-held territory in pink zones in the Miljevci Plateau incident in June 1992 and the area of the Maslenica Bridge in northern Dalmatia in January 1993, the Operation Maslenica. It has been alleged that the timing of the Maslenica and Medak offensives was owed to the political imperatives of Croatian President Franjo Tudjman, who was facing political difficulties following Croatia's intervention in the war in Bosnia. The offensive, 9 to 14 September, Croatian forces began their offensive at approximately 6 o'clock on the 9th of September 1993. The attack involved around 2,500 troops drawn from the Croatian Army's Gospić operational zone, including the 9th Guards Brigade, 111th Brigade, Gospić Home Guard Battalion, Lavonac Home Guard Battalion and special police units of the Croatian Ministry of the Interior. The Croatians were largely armed with equipment captured from the Yugoslav People's Army, including M84 tanks, as well as large numbers of artillery pieces and an array of small arms. The SVK was taken by surprise and fell back. After 2 days of fighting, the Croatian forces had taken control of Dvoselo, Sitlak and part of Positelj. The salient was pinched out with the new front line running just in front of the village of Medak. In retaliation for the offensive, Serb forces began to use long-range artillery to shell the city of Karlovac and fired Frog 7 ballistic missiles into the Croatian capital Zagreb. The attack on Karlovac was especially brutal and dozens of civilians were killed. The SVK launched counter-attacks which retook some of the captured territory and brought the Croatian advance to a halt. It also threatened to attack 20 or 30 more targets throughout Croatia unless the captured territory was handed back. The two sides exchanged heavy artillery fire during 12–13 September, with the UN recording over 6,000 detonations in the Gospić Medak area. On 13 and 14 September, Croatian Air Force MiG-21 aircraft attacked SVK artillery and rocket batteries in Banovina and Kordon, but one aircraft was shot down near Vrginmost. 15–17 September, ceasefire. The offensive attracted strong international criticism and, facing political and military pressure at home and from abroad, the Croatian government agreed to a ceasefire. The United Nations commander in Croatia, General Jean Cot, arranged and mediated ceasefire discussions. On the 15th of September, a ceasefire agreement was signed by General Mile Novakovic on behalf of the Serbian side and Major General Peter Stipetic on behalf of the Croatian side. The agreement required the Croatian forces to withdraw to the starting lines of the 9th of September, and for Serb forces to withdraw from the pocket and remain withdrawn thereafter. The Croatian withdrawal was scheduled for 1200 on the 15th of September. In order to oversee the withdrawal and protect local civilians, UNPROFOR sent 875 troops of the 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry Battle Group to move into the pocket, accompanied by 2 French Army mechanized units. The UN forces, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel James Calvin, were instructed to interpose themselves between the Serb and Croatian forces. Canadian buffer. The Canadians were among the best trained troops at UNPROFOR's disposal, making them a natural choice for this dangerous task. They were equipped with M113 armored personnel carriers and carried a mix of M2 .50 caliber machine guns, C6 medium machine guns, C7 assault rifles, C9 light machine guns, and 84mm Carl Gustaf RCLs. The attached heavy weapons support company brought 81mm mortars and a specially fitted APC armed with anti-tank guided missiles. Croatian forces and other officials involved with the Medak Pocket mission lost confidence in the UN's ability due to failed attacks on forces in the zone of separation between Croatian and Serb forces. Earlier that year, Croatian troops had launched an attack in order to seize a Peruka Lake power dam and reservoir. The dam was gravely damaged on the 28th of January 1993, in the aftermath of Operation Maslenica at 10:48 a.m., when it was blown up in an intentional effort to destroy it by RSK forces. 30 tons of explosive was used, causing heavy damage, but ultimately the effort to demolish the dam failed. The Croatian communities in the Cetina Valley were nevertheless in great danger of being flooded by the lake water. The actions of Major Mark Nicholas Gray of the Royal Marines, deployed with UNPROFOR, prevented total collapse of the dam as he had opened the spillway channel before the explosion and reduced the water level in the lake by 4 meters. Subsequently, the Croatian forces intervened and captured the dam and the surrounding area. UN forces stationed in the area quickly fled before the attacking Croats, confirming Croat beliefs that a show of force would scare away the UN soldiers. Consequently, the UN needed muscle in Sector South to rebuild its credibility in the eyes of many across the globe. With their tough but fair reputation, 2 PPCLI was sent from north near Zagreb to Krajina region in southern Croatia, near the Dalmatian Coast Territory. The Croatian forces, under the pretext of not receiving authorization from Zagreb, decided to attack the Canadian forces who were moving in between the Serb and Croat forces. Private Scott LeBlanc, who was present in the UN forces, recalls, "We started taking fire almost immediately from the Croats. When the Canadians began constructing a fortified position, the Croatians fired hundreds of artillery shells at them. The Canadians successfully used breaks in the shelling to repair and reinforce the positions. The UN forces subsequently took control of abandoned Serbian positions but again came under fire from the Croatian lines, with the attackers using rocket-propelled grenades and anti-aircraft guns. The UN troops then dug in the positions and returned fire. As night fell, the Croatians attempted several flanking maneuvers, but the Canadians responded with fire against the Croatian infantry. The French used 20mm cannon fire to suppress Croatian heavy weapons. The Croatian commander, Rahim Adami, upon realizing that his forces could not complete their objectives, met with the Canadian commander and agreed to a ceasefire where his troops would withdraw by noon the next day. When the deadline passed, Canadian forces attempted to cross the Croatian lines, but were stopped at a mined and well-defended roadblock. Unwilling to fight his way through, Calvin instead held an impromptu media conference with the roadblock as a backdrop, telling 20 or so international journalists that Croatian forces clearly had something to hide. The Croatian High Command, realizing they had a public relations disaster on their hands, quickly moved back to the lines held on the 9th of September. The withdrawal was finally verified as having been completed by 1800 on the 17th of September, bringing the offensive to an end. The advancing Canadian forces discovered that the Croat army had destroyed almost all of the Serb buildings, razing them to the ground. In the burning wrecks, they found 16 mutilated corpses. The Canadians expected to find many survivors hiding in the woods, but no Serb was found alive. Rubber surgical gloves littered the area, leading Calvin to a conclusion that there had been a clean-up operation. Everything was recorded and handed over to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. ICTY indicted Adami in 2001, charging him with crimes against humanity, but he was ultimately acquitted. On the 27th of April 1998, Calvin reported that the Croatians reported that 27 of the members were killed or wounded during the firefights with battle group during the 14 days in Medak. The same report indicates 4 Canadians wounded in initial artillery barrage. 7 French soldiers were injured by landmines. 3 French APCs and a front loader lost to landmines. A Canadian killed and further 2 injured in collision of the Jeep with a Serb truck. The Calvin's report does not identify the Croatian casualty report or its source, even though the operation was considered a success due to the emerging Somalia affair. The clash was not highly publicized at the time. Canadians are trained to deal with foreign population and authorities have to deal with conflicting parties as a non-enemy participant with knowledge and the caution that one side would become the enemy. Canadians are also taught how to deal with human rights violations, especially those that many Canadians had to face in the Medak Pocket where ethnic cleansing occurred. Most importantly, they have an advanced knowledge and skill for the operational knowledge of law and armed conflict. The Canadian troops showed their ability to immediately stand down when Croatian forces ceased fire, and the Canadians reverted to the role as impartial peacekeepers. The French Lieutenant General Jean Cot, who was in charge of the operation and Calvin's superior officer, said, "It was the most important force operation the UN conducted in the former Yugoslavia. While we could not prevent the slaughter of the Serbs by the Croatians, including elderly people and children, we drove back to its start line a well-equipped Croatian battalion of some 1,000 men. Together, the Canadians and the French succeeded in breaking the Croatian lines, and with their weapons locked and loaded and ready, firing when necessary, they circled and disarmed an 18-soldier commando from the Croatian Special Forces who had penetrated by night into the location. They did everything I expected from them and showed what real soldiers can do." Croatian denial. In 2002, the Croatian newspaper National published a report claiming that the armed conflict between the Croatian and Canadian forces in Operation Medak Pocket from 9 to the 17th of September 1993 never happened, and that the Canadians had fired no more than a couple of shots into the night. Retired Croatian Admiral Davor Mazeloso, testifying at 2007 trial of General Mirko Norak, commanding officer of the 9th Guards Brigade in September 1993, and General Rahim Adami, commanding officer of the Gospić military district at the time, denied Canadian claims of scale of the armed conflict with UNPROFOR and 26 Croatian fatalities resulting from the battle. He went on to say that he wonders if the 26 victims were Serbs, since the claim of 26 killed Croats was not true. This was denied by Calvin and decorated Canadian Army veterans who served at Medak. For their part, the Croatian authorities, both civil and military, during the aftermath of the skirmish with the UN forces and in the years that followed, have never admitted that any serious battle with UNPROFOR forces in the Medak area ever occurred, and claimed that the Canadian forces' version of events is politically motivated. Nielsen denial. Retired Royal Danish Army Colonel Vagn over Moberg Nielsen, UNPROFOR commanding officer in the area at the time, but who was not present for the battle, testifying at the Adami Norak trial, denied that there was any armed conflict between the Canadian and Croatian troops except for a single incident when the Canadians deployed in front of Serb-held positions. Croatian Army fired shots, but the Canadians did not return fire. He added that the firing stopped when Croats realized that they are engaging the UN force. Canadian denial. In Canada, the event has been referred to as Canada's secret battle. The Medak Pocket was an event that challenged the skill and discipline of an army that had not deployed formed units to fight in a full-scale battle for almost 40 years. Military analysts have since written extensively of the effects the battle at Medak Pocket has had on the Canadian military, including the management of public information regarding the battle, and both the Canadian military's and the Canadian public's perception of what peacekeepers were trained to do. The battle did not gain widespread public attention in Canada at the time. War crimes investigations. The UN immediately began an investigation into the events at Medak. The task was hampered by the systematic destruction that had been carried out by the withdrawing Croatians. The UN forces found that each and every building in the Medak Pocket had been leveled to the ground, in a total of 11 villages and hamlets. Investigators from the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia determined that at least 100 Serb civilians had been unlawfully killed, and many others had suffered serious injuries. Many of the victims were women and elderly people. 29 executed Serb civilians have been identified, as well as 5 Serb soldiers who had been captured or wounded. More were thought to have been killed, but the bodies were said to have been removed or destroyed by the Croatians. In addition, Serb-owned property was systematically looted and destroyed to render the area uninhabitable. Personal belongings, household goods, furniture, housing items, farm animals, farm machinery and other equipment were looted or destroyed, and wells were polluted to make them unusable. An estimated 164 homes and 148 barns and outbuildings were burned down or blown up. Much of the destruction was said to have taken place during the 48 hours between the ceasefire being signed and the withdrawal being completed. The U.S. Department of State claimed that Croatian forces destroyed 11 Serbian villages and killed at least 67 individuals, including civilians. Several members of the Croatian military were subsequently charged with war crimes. The highest-ranking indictee was General Janko Bobetko. He was indicted for war crimes by the ICTY in 2001, but died before the case was heard by the court, and in consequence the trial was cancelled. The wider area was under the jurisdiction of the Gospić military district, commanded at the time by Brigadier Rahim Adami. He was also indicted by the ICTY and was transferred there in 2001. In 2004, General Mirko Norak, who was already serving a 12-year jail sentence in Croatia for his role in the Gospić massacre, was also indicted and transferred to The Hague. The two cases were joined in July 2004, and in November 2005 the tribunal agreed to a Croatian government request to transfer the case back to Croatia for trial before a Croatian court. The trial of Mirko Norak and Rahim Adami began at the Zagreb County Court in June 2007 and resulted in first-degree verdict in May 2008, whereby Norak was found guilty and given a 7-year sentence for failing to stop his soldiers killing Serbs, while Adami was acquitted. The appeal went to the Supreme Court of Croatia, which rendered its verdict in November 2009, confirming the previous verdict but commuting Norak's sentence by a year. The final appeals were rejected in March 2010. The process was tracked for the ICTY prosecutor by the OSCE Zagreb office. Aftermath. After the offensive, most of the villages in the area were destroyed and depopulated. Even today, the region is still largely abandoned, though some Serbs have since returned to it. The region remained, in effect, neutral ground between the warring sides until near the end of the war. It was recaptured by the Croatian Army on 4 August 1995 during Operation Storm, which ended in the defeat of the self-proclaimed Republic of Serbian Krajina. The Medak Pocket offensive can be considered a tactical victory for the Croats in that it reduced the Serb threat against Gospić and permanently eliminated the possibility of splitting Croatia in half as had been planned. The offensive also exposed serious weaknesses in the Croatian Army's command, control, and communications, which had also been a problem in Operation Maslenica earlier in the year. The operation caused serious political difficulties for the Croatian government, which was heavily criticized abroad for its actions at Medak. The well-publicized accusations of war crimes, along with the Muslim Croat bloodshed in Bosnia, led to Croatia's image being severely tarnished in many quarters abroad. The country was viewed as having moved from being a victim to an aggressor. The war crimes committed during the operation damaged the credibility of UNPROFOR as well, as its forces had been unable to prevent them despite being in the vicinity at the time. Boutros Ghali, the UN Secretary-General, admitted that the 9th of September 1993 Croatian destruction of 3 villages in the Medak Pocket has, despite the robust action taken by UNPROFOR to secure the withdrawal of Croatian forces, further increased the mistrust of the Serbs towards UNPROFOR and has led to the reaffirmation of the refusal to disarm. In turn, this refusal to disarm, as required in the United Nations peacekeeping plan, has prevented UNPROFOR from implementing other essential elements of the plan, particularly facilitating the return of refugees and displaced persons to their places of origins in secure conditions. The 2nd Battalion PPCLI Battle Group was later awarded the Commander-in-Chief Unit Commendation for its actions in the Medak Pocket, the first Canadian unit ever presented this unit commendation. Bibliography. Hoff, Carol. The Ghosts of Medak Pocket, The Story of Canada's Secret War. Vintage Canada. ISBN 0-679-31294-3. Dallaire, edited by Bernd Horn. Foreword by Romeo. Fortune favors the brave. Tales of courage and tenacity in Canadian military history. Toronto: Dundurn Press. ISBN 978-1-550028416. Somalia: Report of the Commission of Inquiry into the Deployment of Canadian Forces to Dishonored Legacy. Ottawa: Canada Communications Group. ISBN 0-661-7068-X. Weeks, Paul DeRose Edwards, Jack Dangerfield Randy. Non-Traditional Military Training for Canadian Peacekeepers, a study prepared for the Commission of Inquiry into the Deployment of Canadian Forces to Somalia. Ottawa: Minister of Public Works and Government Services, Canada. ISBN 0-660-16881-2.